Hello everybody, and welcome back to learning about chess. In our first video, we looked at how to set up the board, where the pieces go, and how they move. Today, we're going to be taking a look at how to finish the game. How do we win? How do we checkmate the opponent's king? What is checkmate? And also, what are some other things that could happen in the game? How could a draw occur? What is stalemate? Those are the questions we're going to be asking today. Now, we know that each side is going to have a king when they're playing their game. The way that you win the game is to capture the opponent's king. In our last video, we showed the way that the king moves, that they can move to any of the squares around him. So the white king, for example, can go to any one of these 8 squares here on the board, whereas the black king can come to any one of the 8 squares here. 3 of those squares that we just mentioned, both kings can go to. So what happens in that situation if the 2 kings can both go to a square at the same time? Now, when your king comes under the attack of an opponent's piece, that's what we call check. So for example, if black were to have a bishop on this square here, that bishop attacks white's king, the white king is in check. One of the rules of chess is that you're not allowed to move into check. It's considered an illegal move if you move your king to a square where it's attacked by an opponent's piece. So, where this situation occurs, and we have these 3 squares that both kings are eyeing, it is illegal for white to actually move his king here. If he did this, this would be an illegal move. It's not allowed. We'll see how this plays a factor in both our checkmate and stalemate. So how does checkmate occur? Well, let's say that our kings are over here by the corner of the board. Because the 2 kings can't move to where they would be attacking one another, you're going to have another piece in order to make checkmate. It's going to be impossible for you to checkmate with just a lone king, because neither one of you is going to ever be able to move close enough to capture one another. So let's say that we have a queen over here, for example, and that it's black's turn to move. Black wants to checkmate the white king. White's king has 3 squares that he can go to. 1, 2, 3. The way to create checkmate is to make it so that the white king cannot move to any one of these squares, and the square he's on, A1, also has to come under attack. So black has to attack all 4 of these squares at the same time in order for checkmate to happen. So what black can do here, he has a few different ways of doing it, but the simplest way is to play the king, or the queen rather, to A2. Now the queen is attacking the king. The queen also attacks B2 and B1, and if the white king tries to take the queen, well, he can't do that because this king can take him back, as we already talked about. So this is our first and simplest example of what a checkmate is. The opponent's king cannot capture the queen because it's defended, and nor can it come to any one of the other squares. It's not able to get away, so what we have is checkmate. Now, when you're in check, how can you escape? So let's say we have our king here, we have a black queen on the board, and the black king as well. So let's say that black were to play the move queen to E3. Well, when you're in check, there are 3 ways to get out of check. In this position, the easiest way is to simply move away. I can play king F1, or I can play king D1. Move the king out of check. That's the first way. The second way that you can get out of check is to block with one of your pieces. So if we had a knight over here, after the move queen E3, we can play knight to E2. And after knight E2, the knight now stops the queen from attacking the king. So we can either move away, or we can block with one of our own pieces. The third way to get out of check, and this is usually the one that we like if we have the option, would be to capture the piece that is giving that check. So here the queen attacks from E3. White can simply play bishop takes E3, Now there's no longer a threat, the king's no longer under attack, and we're out of check. So, how are those three ways to get out of a check again? We can move away, we can put something in the middle, we can block, or we can simply recapture. Now, one thing to note is if we are under attack by an opponent's knight, we're not going to have that blocking ability. Remember, knights can jump over other pieces, so if the knight attacks the king, the only thing that we're going to be able to do is move away or capture that knight if we have the option. There's not going to be an option for blocking. There's no good way to do that. Now, the last situation is what we call a stalemate, and this is a very interesting concept in chess. Now, drawing in chess can happen in a few different ways. One way to draw would simply be that there's not enough material left on the board to create a checkmate, like we showed before. If only the kings are left on the board, this is going to be a draw by what we call insufficient material. It's impossible to create a checkmate. The other examples of this would be simply king and bishop versus king. It's impossible to create a checkmate with just the king and the bishop versus the king. And also king and knight versus king. These two situations, there's not enough material on the board for black to be able to checkmate white. All of these are known draws. You can play with them as much as you'd like. Feel free to tinker with them, move the pieces around, try it out, but what you'll find is there's no way for black to checkmate the white king with just a knight or just a lone bishop. Now, stalemate is an interesting scenario. So let's look at this position here. Let's imagine that it's white's turn to move. Now, as you can see, the black queen is attacking both b2 and b1, as well as a2. Black's king also attacks a2 and b2. So none of the squares here are allowed for white to move to. White cannot move his king. However, white's king itself is not under attack. The queen does not attack the king, nor does black's king attack the king. So what can white do? Well, white has no legal moves in this situation. There's nowhere that he can go, and so we have what is called a stalemate. The stalemate results in a draw. So this is something that you really want to watch out for in your games. Imagine if you were the black pieces here, and you had just had your queen over here, you just moved queen to b3, and suddenly white says, oh, the game's over and it's a draw. This would be a terrible blunder, and we don't want this to happen to you in any of your games if you have this sort of material advantage. We'll look a little bit later on in some videos at techniques. How do you checkmate with the queen and the king? How do you checkmate with the rooks and the different pieces so that you can avoid this sort of scenario? Other ways to draw that are important to know. There's one that we call threefold repetition. So if you repeat a position 3 times without a pawn move or a capture, then you're going to have a draw. So, for example, if black plays queen here, white plays king here, the black queen comes back, the white king comes back. This is the second time we've seen this. We do the same thing again. Black queen c b4, white king to b1, and now we've repeated the position 3 times. White is allowed to claim a draw in this scenario. You don't have to if you don't choose to, but either player can say, hey, this has happened 3 times, we're going to call it a draw, the day is done. Now, the third way to have a draw occur is to make 50 moves without either a capture on the board or the advancing of a pawn. Pawns kind of create the structure of the board in chess. We saw how they moved in the last game. We saw that they can work and eventually promote, become another piece. So if the pawns are stuck in place and they're never captured, they never move, there's not really any progress being made. Nothing is happening to move the game toward a result. So if 50 moves are made by both sides with no pawn move or a capture, it's considered a draw. And then, of course, the fourth way to have a draw would simply be for both sides to agree. Some tournaments have rules against agreeing to a draw. before so many moves have been played, in order to avoid people simply setting up draws and not playing actual games. And it's rather boring to agree to a draw, especially if you're a beginner. Probably don't agree to draws. Figure out how to play the game, right? See if you can't get your pieces onto the right places, get an advantage, try to win. Agreeing to a draw is never any fun. Nobody wants to draw. We want to win, right? So we've looked at checkmate and we've looked at stalemate now, and hopefully you have an idea of what these two scenarios are. In some future videos, like I said, we'll go over some techniques. How can you create checkmate? How can you avoid these stalemates? If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing all that you guys can do, checkmating more of your opponent's kings in the days to come.